In the shadowed halls of Harrington Manor, nestled amid the misty English countryside of 1932, the air hung heavy with the scent of roses and regret. Lady Evelyn Harrington, the epitome of elegance, lay lifeless on the Persian rug of her drawing room, a crystal glass shattered beside her pale hand. The poison had struck swiftly during the intimate dinner party, her final gasp echoing like a betrayed whisper. Guests froze in horror as the clock struck midnight. Who among them, her devoted husband, her secretive lover, or her envious sister, had orchestrated this fatal betrayal? Hercule Poirot, the renowned detective, would soon unravel the threads of love turned lethal. Chapter 1. The Fatal Dinner. The fog that evening was not the gentle, drifting mist of an English autumn. It was a living thing, thick and deliberate, pressing against the leaded windows of Harrington Manor as though it wished to witness what unfolded within. The manor itself stood upon a low rise of the Berkshire Downs, a sprawling edifice of honey-colored stone built in the reign of Queen Anne, and enlarged rather ostentatiously by the late Sir Geoffrey Harrington during the exuberant 1890s. Its chimneys, 16 in number, punctured the bruised sky like the fingers of a drowning man. Inside, the great hall was lit by a single chandelier of Waterford crystal, its prisms scattering candlelight across oak paneling blackened by 3 centuries of peat and tobacco smoke. At precisely 7 o'clock, the grandfather clock in the corridor, an import from Vienna, its face painted with allegorical figures of time and death, struck the hour with a sound like a coffin lid closing. The guests, already assembled in the crimson drawing room, flinched as one. Lady Evelyn Harrington stood beneath a portrait of her great-grandmother, the infamous Duchess of Marchmont, who had once duelled a Russian prince over a game of faro. Evelyn wore emerald silk cut on the bias, the fabric clinging to her like a jealous lover. A single strand of pearls, flawless, each the size of a thrush's egg, lay against the hollow of her throat. Her hair, the color of burnished chestnuts, was coiled in the fashionable Eton crop, though a rebellious curl had escaped to caress the nape of her neck. She was 33, and the mirror had lately begun to betray her. The faintest tracery of lines fanned from the corners of her eyes when she smiled, which was seldom. Across the room, her husband, Lord Reginald Harrington, nursed a whiskey and soda. He was a tall man, 51 years of age, with the posture of a cavalry officer and the mustache of a walrus. His dinner jacket strained across shoulders still powerful from years of polo and pig-sticking in India. The Harrington fortune, built on steel, railways, and a judicious marriage to Evelyn's father's shipping line, had begun to fray at the edges. The Wall Street crash of '29 had not been kind, and the whispers in the city were that Reginald had overextended himself in Argentine beef futures. His eyes, the pale blue of glacier ice, flicked continually toward the French windows as though expecting an intruder. "Reginald, darling," Evelyn called, her voice a silver bell across the murmur of conversation. "Do stop brooding. We have guests." He forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Merely ensuring the port is breathing, my dear." To Evelyn's left stood Charles Dumont, the painter. He was 30, slight of build, with the languid grace of a cat and the restless hands of an artist who could never quite capture the exact shade of a woman's despair. His hair was black and glossy, combed back with brilliantine. His evening clothes were Parisian, the lapels a fraction narrower than London fashion dictated. He had arrived from Montparnasse 6 weeks earlier, ostensibly to paint Evelyn's portrait, though the canvas in the studio remained stubbornly blank. His accent curled around English vowels like smoke. "Madame is radiant tonight," he murmured, raising his glass. "To beauty that defies the fog." Evelyn's laugh was low, almost a purr. "Flattery, Charles, is the cheapest currency in Paris. Spend it wisely." At the fireplace, Amelia Forsyth, Evelyn's younger sister by 5 years, sat rigid upon a gilt chair that looked too delicate for her angular frame. Amelia had inherited neither her sister's beauty nor her fortune, only the sharp Forsyth nose and a Dowd's wardrobe of sensible tweed. She wore a dress of bottle green velvet that did nothing for her sallow complexion, and her fingers worried at a lace handkerchief until the threads began to fray. Amelia had lived at Harrington Manor since their father's death, a permanent guest in her own childhood home, dependent upon Evelyn's capricious generosity. The will, read in the solicitor's office in 28, had left everything to Evelyn with a codicil promising Amelia an annuity should she conduct herself with propriety. The word propriety had been underlined twice. The fifth guest was Dr. Malcolm Thorne, the family physician, a stooped man of 60 with a beard like a bird's nest, and the nervous habit of polishing his spectacles on his waistcoat. He had been summoned ostensibly to advise on Lord Reginald's gout, but his presence tonight felt less medical than funereal. Dinner was announced by Jenkins, the butler, whose face had the pallor and immobility of a death mask. He had served the family for 40 years, ever since he was a footman under Sir Geoffrey, and his loyalty was absolute, though whether to the living or the dead was a matter of conjecture. The dining room lay beyond the drawing room, a cavernous space paneled in dark walnut and hung with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow the guests as they processed beneath the flickering light of a dozen candelabra. The table was set for 6, though only 5 would dine. A place had been laid for Sir Geoffrey Harrington, dead these 4 years. Out of superstition or sentiment, no one was certain. His chair remained empty, a silent accuser. The centerpiece was a silver epergne overflowing with hothouse roses, their petals the color of arterial blood. The scent was cloying, almost obscene. Jenkins served the first course. Consommé madeleine clear as amber, garnished with a single quenelle of foie gras. The soup plates were Sèvres, the spoons heavy Georgian silver. Conversation was desultory. Reginald spoke of the deteriorating situation in Germany, Herr Hitler's speeches, the burning of books. Charles countered with anecdotes of Montparnasse cafes, of Picasso's latest mistress, of the absurd prices fetched by abstract daubs. Evelyn listened with half an ear, her gaze drifting to the rain-lashed windows. Amelia said nothing at all. The fish course arrived, sole bonne femme, the flesh poached in white wine and finished with a glaze of hollandaise. Charles complimented the chef, Mrs. Danvers, who had trained under Escoffier at the Savoy before retiring to the country. Evelyn merely picked at her plate. "Darling, you're not eating," Reginald observed, his tone edged with something sharper than concern. "I find I have little appetite tonight." Evelyn's fingers strayed to the stem of her wine glass. It was a Riedel crystal, thin as a soap bubble, filled with a 1921 Chateau Margaux that had cost Reginald a small fortune. The entree was roast pheasant, the birds shot on the estate the previous week by Reginald and his gamekeeper. The flesh was dark and succulent, served with bread sauce, game chips, and a compote of damsons. The wine progressed to a 1918 Requiem with the sweetness of liquid sunlight. It was during the pheasant that the atmosphere shifted, as though a door had opened somewhere, letting in a draught from a colder world. Evelyn raised her glass, the candlelight fractured within the facets of the crystal, scattering rubies across the damask cloth. "To love," she said, her voice suddenly brittle, "and its inevitable betrayals." The words fell into the silence like a stone into a well. Reginald's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Charles' eyes widened. Amelia's knuckles whitened around her napkin. Dr. Thorne coughed into his serviette. Evelyn drank deeply. The wine stained her lips the color of fresh blood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her hand flew to her throat. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the plate with a sound like a pistol shot. She rose halfway from her chair, her eyes bulging, her mouth working soundlessly. A thin line of foam appeared at the corner of her lips. "Evelyn!" Reginald was on his feet, knocking over his chair. She collapsed forward, her forehead striking the table with a sickening thud. The roses in the épergne trembled. A single petal detached itself and drifted down to rest upon her outflung hand. "Poison!" The word tore from Dr. Thorne's throat as he scrambled around the table. His fingers sought the pulse at her neck, found nothing. "Cyanide. Potassium cyanide. Fetch my bag. Jenkins, my bag." Chaos erupted. Amelia screamed, a high, animal sound. Charles stood frozen, his face the color of parchment. Reginald stared at his wife's body as though it were an accusation. Jenkins, for the first time in 40 years, lost his composure. He dropped the silver salver he had been holding, and the pheasant bones scattered across the Aubusson carpet like the relics of some pagan sacrifice. Dr. Thorne worked frantically, loosening Evelyn's collar, tilting her head back, attempting to force charcoal between her clenched teeth. It was futile. Within 90 seconds, Lady Evelyn Harrington was dead. The clock in the hall struck midnight, 12 sonorous chimes, each one a nail in a coffin. Reginald found his voice first. "Lock the doors," he ordered hoarsely. "No one leaves this room." But it was already too late. From Evelyn's limp fingers, a folded square of paper fluttered to the floor. Charles stooped to retrieve it, his artist's fingers trembling. He unfolded it with the reverence of a priest opening a reliquary. The note was written in Evelyn's own hand, the ink still faintly damp. "Betrayal comes from those we trust most. Forgive me." Beneath the table, unnoticed in the confusion, a single drop of wine had fallen from the shattered glass and was slowly soaking into the carpet, spreading like a bloodstain. The decanter, still 3/4 full, stood innocently upon the sideboard, its cut glass stopper reflecting the candlelight in 100 malevolent eyes. Outside, the fog pressed closer, swallowing the manor whole. Somewhere in the distance, a fox screamed, a sound uncannily like a woman in agony. Inspector Japp would not arrive for another 3 hours, summoned by a frantic telephone call to the local constabulary. By then, the pheasant would be cold, the wine sour, and the roses beginning to wilt. But in that moment, as the candles guttered in their sockets and the portraits of dead Harringtons looked down in silent judgment, the game had already begun. Hercule Poirot, asleep in his Brussels apartment, had no inkling that the little gray cells would soon be summoned across the channel to untangle a knot of love, greed, and murder most foul. In the dining room of Harrington Manor, the first act of betrayal had been played. The second was only just beginning. Chapter 2. Poirot's Arrival. The morning of the 14th of October 1932 broke over Harrington Manor with the reluctant pallor of a consumptive dawn. The fog had not lifted. It had merely thinned to a jaundiced haze that turned the elms along the drive into skeletal sentinels. A black Daimler, its chrome dulled by dew, purred up the gravel with the discretion of a mourner at a funeral. The chauffeur, Georges, Poirot's taciturn Belgian factotum, alighted first, opening the rear door with a click that sounded unnaturally loud in the hush. Hercule Poirot emerged like a conjurer producing a dove from a top hat. He wore a charcoal gray overcoat of vicuna, its collar turned up against the damp, and a Homburg hat tilted at a precise 15-degree angle. His patent leather shoes gleamed despite the puddles. He navigated them with the delicacy of a cat crossing a stream. In his gloved hand he carried a Malacca cane with a silver swan's head handle, though he used it more for punctuation than support. His mustaches, magnificent, symmetrical, waxed to rapier points, twitched once, as if scenting the air for deceit. Inspector Japp waited on the portico, his bowler clutched in one hand, a cigarette smoldering in the other. The yardman looked as though he had not slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his mustache less disciplined than usual. "Poirot," he greeted, exhaling smoke like a dragon. "Thank God you're here. This one's a proper mare's nest." "Bon matin, mon ami," Poirot replied, his accent a velvet scalpel. "You summon me across the channel for a mare's nest? I trust the nest contains golden eggs of truth." Jap snorted. "Golden eggs and a dead peahen. Come inside before the press sniffs us out." They passed beneath the stone archway carved with the Harrington crest, a griffin rampant clutching a broken sword, and entered the great hall. The air was colder than the grave, scented with beeswax, chrysanthemums, and the faint metallic tang of blood that no amount of scrubbing could quite erase. Jenkins materialized from the shadows like a well-trained ghost, his face the color of old parchment. "Monsieur Poirot," he intoned, bowing so low his spine creaked. "Her ladyship's, Lady Evelyn's, body remains in the morning room. Dr. Thorne insists upon a post-mortem, but Lord Harrington will wait," Poirot cut in smoothly. "First, the scene, then the souls." The drawing room had been transformed into a shrine of suspicion. The Persian rug bore a darker stain where Evelyn had fallen. Someone had attempted to conceal it beneath a Kashmiri shawl, but the weave drank the wine like a sponge. The shattered crystal had been swept into a dustpan, yet a single shard glittered malevolently beneath the piano leg, winking like a conspirator. The decanter stood upon the sideboard, stoppered now, its contents reduced to a viscous crimson that caught the light like congealing blood. Poirot knelt, his knees protesting despite the cushion George produced from nowhere. He produced a monocle, more for effect than necessity, and examined the decanter's lip. A faint oily film clung to the glass, iridescent as a pigeon's throat. "Cyanide," he murmured. "Potassium cyanide, to be precise. The almond scent is unmistakable, though masked by the Margot. A professional touch." Jap hovered. The wine was poured at table. Jenkins swears the decanter was untouched until then. Jenkins swears many things, I suspect. Poirot's gaze swept the room. The temperature. Note how the candles burned low. The meal lasted perhaps 90 minutes. Cyanide acts within seconds. Therefore, the poison was introduced during the pheasant or immediately prior. He rose, dusting imaginary specks from his trousers. "Now the players in this tragedy. Present them to me, Jap, as one presents cards in a game of bezique." They began with Lord Reginald. He received them in the library, a cavern of Morocco-bound volumes and the faint aroma of Havana cigars. Reginald had not changed from his dinner clothes. The black tie hung askew, the starched shirt front crumpled like a battle flag. His eyes were bloodshot. Whether from grief or whiskey was impossible to discern. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, the name mangled into Poirot. "I've heard of you, little Belgian fellow with the egg-shaped head. Solve this quickly. My wife deserves justice." "Justice," Poirot echoed, savoring the word. "And truth, my lord. They are not always twins." He studied Reginald's hands, large, capable, the knuckles scarred from polo mallets. "You were seated at the head of the table?" "Opposite my wife. Customary." "And you poured the wine?" "Jenkins did, from the decanter." "Yet you drank from the same vintage?" Reginald hesitated a fraction too long. "I prefer whiskey after the fish course." "Convenient." Poirot's smile was wintry. "Tell me of the toast. To love and its inevitable betrayals." "Your wife's words?" Reginald's jaw tightened. "Evelyn was given to dramatics. The stage lost a star when she married me." "Or gained a martyr." They moved on to Charles Dumont, discovered in the conservatory surrounded by half-finished canvases and the smell of turpentine. The artist wore a paint-spattered smock over his evening clothes, his fingers stained with cerulean and rose madder. A portrait of Evelyn, unfinished, the eyes merely suggested, leaned against an easel. The painted gaze followed them accusingly. Monsieur Dumont, Poirot began. You were Madame's lover? Charles flinched as though struck. I painted her soul, not merely her face. There is a difference. Yet souls can be poisoned as easily as bodies. Poirot lifted the torn locket from his pocket. Japp had surrendered it reluctantly. This was found upon her person, your photograph, non, torn with violence. Charles turned away, his reflection fractured in the glass roof. She ended it, said it was a mistake. I begged her to leave with me, Monte Carlo, Capri, anywhere. She laughed, said I was a boy playing at passion. And boys, Poirot observed, sometimes strike back. Amelia Forsyth was last, encountered in the morning room where Evelyn's body lay beneath a sheet. The sister sat beside the bier like a gargoyle, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes dry but red-rimmed. The room smelled of formaldehyde and lilies. You kept vigil, mademoiselle, Poirot asked softly. Someone should, Amelia replied. Reginald is drowning his grief in brandy. Charles is painting his guilt. I am merely here. Poirot studied her. Amelia's grief was a performance, but was it authentic? Your sister's will, it disinherited you? After father died, yes. Evelyn promised to provide, but promises are wind. Her fingers strayed to the sheet, tracing the outline of Evelyn's hand. She changed everything last week, said I was ungrateful. I found the new codicil in her desk. Everything to charity, some home for fallen women. Ironic, n'est-ce pas? Most ironic. Poirot's gaze fell upon the corpse. With Japp's grudging permission, he lifted the sheet. Evelyn's face was serene in death. The lips faintly blue, the pearls still around her throat like a noose of innocence. He noted the faint bruising at the wrist. Defensive, perhaps, and the single rose petal caught in her hair. As he replaced the sheet, his foot brushed something beneath the chaise longue. He bent, retrieving a small glass vial, empty, its label peeled away. A trace of white powder clung to the interior. Japp, he called softly. Your golden egg, I think. The inspector bagged the vial with reverence. Cyanide? Undoubtedly. But whose fingers held it last? Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the gardens in sodden detail. The yew hedges clipped into funeral shapes, the sundial frozen at midnight, the fountain where a stone nymph wept endlessly into a basin of black water. Poirot stood at the French windows, his reflection superimposed upon the scene like a ghost. The crime, he said to no one in particular, was not one of impulse. It was choreographed with the precision of a ballet. The decanter, the toast, the note, all pieces of a pas de deux. But who led and who followed? Behind him, unseen, Amelia's hand slipped into her pocket, closing around something small and metallic. The locket's clasp, perhaps, or the missing stopper from the decanter. The clock in the hall struck 10. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. The game, mes amis, has only just begun. Chapter 3. The Husband's Alibi. The library of Harrington Manor smelled of Morocco leather, Cuban tobacco, and the faint, acrid residue of fear. A coal fire crackled in the Adam grate, throwing capering shadows across the coffered ceiling. Lord Reginald Harrington stood before it like a man awaiting the firing squad, his broad back to the door. He had discarded the crumpled dinner jacket. Now he wore a burgundy smoking gown, its silk lapels stained with ash from the pipe clenched between his teeth. The pipe had gone out, but he continued to suck at it as though it might yet yield comfort. Hercule Poirot entered without knocking, his footsteps muffled by the Bokhara rug. Inspector Japp followed, notebook in hand, his bowler still clutched like a talisman. The door closed with a soft click that sounded in the hush like the cocking of a pistol. "Milord," Poirot began removing his gloves finger by finger. "We must speak of alibis. They are the scaffolding upon which justice either stands or collapses." Reginald turned. The firelight carved hollows beneath his cheekbones. His eyes were the color of winter seas. "I've nothing to hide, Poirot. Ask your damned questions." Poirot's mustache twitched, a minute adjustment that spoke volumes. He selected a chair of carved mahogany, its seat cushioned in bottle green velvet, and sat with the precision of a watchmaker. Japp remained standing, pencil poised. "You were seated at the head of the table," Poirot recapped, "opposite your wife. The decanter stood to your right upon the dumb waiter. Jenkins poured for Madame first, then for the others. You abstained after the fish course, whiskey instead, correct?" Reginald nodded curtly. "I've a stomach for whiskey, not claret. Doctor's orders." "Dr. Thorne's orders, yes, yet the whiskey decanter, where was it?" "On the sideboard, same as always." Reginald gestured vaguely toward a George III piece of satinwood, its surface marred by generations of glass rings. Poirot rose and crossed to it. The whiskey decanter, cut crystal, heavy as a cannonball, stood beside a silver tray of soda siphons. He lifted the stopper, sniffed delicately. "Lafroig, peaty. A man's drink." He replaced it with care. "And during the pheasant, you left the table?" Reginald's jaw worked. "I went to the library, needed a book, something on Bordeaux vintages. Evelyn was particular about the 21 Margot." "Particular?" Poirot echoed. "Yet she drank but one glass before the toast. You returned with this book?" "It's there." Reginald indicated a shelf at eye level, a slim volume bound in green calf, The Wines of Bordeaux by one Professor Saintsbury, protruded slightly as though recently handled. Poirot drew it out. The pages fell open at a chapter on the 1921 vintage. A bookmark, a scrap of crimson silk, lay between pages 142 and 143. "Curious," Poirot murmured. "The bookmark is torn from a lady's scarf. Your wife's, perhaps?" Reginald's color rose. I must have used whatever was to hand." Japp scribbled furiously. Poirot replaced the book and turned to the desk. A partner's desk of burr walnut, its surface a battlefield of papers, ledgers, and a brass inkstand shaped like a rearing stallion. A blotter showed fresh impressions. "If you betray me again." The sentence trailed off, the pen having gouged the paper in fury. "Milord," Poirot said softly, "you discovered your wife's affair with Monsieur Dumont." Reginald's pipe clattered to the hearth. "Who told you that?" "The little gray cells, they do not require telling. They observe. The torn photograph in the locket, the tension at table, the toast itself, to love and its inevitable betrayals. A cri de coeur, non?" Reginald sank into a leather wing chair as though his legs had betrayed him. "I found letters in her bureau. Filthy, passionate scribbles, Paris postmarks. I confronted her 3 weeks ago. She laughed, said it was a flirtation, nothing more. But I saw them together in the conservatory, his hands." He broke off, knuckles white on the chair's arms. "And divorce? Out of the question. The scandal, my position on the board of Imperial Steel, her money tied up in trusts. I'd be ruined." His voice cracked like splitting ice. Poirot circled the desk. In the top drawer lay a small glass vial, its label half scratched away. Potassium cyanide, for photographic use. A red wax seal had been broken. The vial was empty. "For the dark room," Reginald said quickly. "I dabble in photography, fox hunts, that sort of thing." "Yet the dark room is in the west wing," Japp interjected, "and the key is kept by the housekeeper. She swears it hasn't been touched in months." Reginald's eyes darted. "Then someone planted it." "Someone," Poirot mused, "who wished you to appear guilty. A cufflink was found near the decanter, gold engraved with your initials. You lost it?" I've a dozen pairs, it could be any. Poirot opened another drawer. Inside lay a single white kid glove, the mate to one found stained with powder in Amelia's room. A faint scent of tuberose clung to the leather. Your wife's glove, perhaps? Or another's? Reginald stared as though seeing it for the first time. I don't know. They were interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. Jenkins entered, his face gray. Begging your pardon, sir. Miss Forsyth, she's in the morning room, with the body, and there's something you should see. The morning room was a bower of hothouse lilies, their perfume cloying. Evelyn lay upon a bier of black velvet, her pearls gleaming like frost. Amelia stood beside her, rigid as a mourner's statue. In her hand she held a small enamel box, Reginald's snuff box, missing since the previous evening. I found it, Amelia said, her voice brittle, beneath the chaise, where Evelyn fell. She opened the lid. Inside, nestled among grains of Spanish bran, lay a single gold cufflink, Reginald's. Reginald lunged forward. That's not possible, Poirot intercepted him with a raised hand. Patience, my lord. Observe. He took the cufflink, turning it to the light. The engraving was crisp, R.H., but beneath, almost invisible, a scratch marred the gold, a deliberate mark, as though made by a file. A forgery? Japp breathed. Or a message, Poirot replied. The real cufflink, where is it? Amelia's eyes glittered. Ask my brother-in-law. He was in the library alone for nearly 20 minutes, time enough to tamper with the decanter, plant evidence, compose himself. Reginald rounded on her. You poisonous little, you've hated us both since father died. Enough! Poirot's voice cut like a whip. The room fell silent save for the ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantel. We deal in facts, not recriminations. My lord, your alibi rests upon the book, the bookmark, the whiskey, yet the clock in the dining room, it stopped at 11:47. The library clock reads 11:52, a discrepancy of 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, a man might cross the corridor, poison a glass, return unseen. Reginald paled. The clocks, they're old, they vary. Or one was stopped deliberately, by whom? From the corridor came the sound of running feet. Dr. Thorne burst in, his beard disheveled. Inspector, the post-mortem, preliminary findings. The cyanide was ingested in liquid form mixed with the wine, but there's bruising on the wrists. Defensive. She fought her killer. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Fought, yet no one heard a struggle. Amelia smiled, a thin, wintry thing. Perhaps because the struggle was silent. A hand over mouth, a whisper. This is for your betrayals. Reginald took a step toward her. Japp moved to intercept, but Poirot raised a hand. No. Let them speak. The truth, it emerges in anger. Reginald's voice shook. I loved her, damn you. Flawed, yes. Faithless, perhaps. But I didn't kill her. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then softly. We shall see, but first, he turned to Jenkins. The servants' stairs. They lead from the pantry to the library corridor? Yes, sir. Rarely used. Show me. As they filed out, Amelia called after them. Ask him about the letters, Monsieur Poirot. The ones he burned in the grate. I saw the ashes. In the corridor, Poirot paused beneath a portrait of Sir Geoffrey Harrington, Reginald's father-in-law, his eyes stern beneath beetling brows. The old man's hand rested upon a globe. His finger pointed accusingly at South America. Argentina, Poirot murmured, where my lord invested so heavily and lost so much, a motive perhaps beyond jealousy. Japp whistled. You think he poisoned her for the insurance? I think, Poirot said, that love and money are Siamese twins, cut one and both bleed. Behind them, unnoticed, the library door stood ajar. A scrap of crimson silk, the bookmark, fluttered to the rug dislodged by a draft. Beneath it, pressed into the pile, was the faint outline of a woman's shoe. Small, delicate, not Evelyn's. The clock struck the quarter hour. Somewhere in the house, a woman began to weep. Chapter 4. The Lover's Confession. The conservatory of Harrington Manor was a glass cathedral to the dying year. Condensation wept down the panes in slow, deliberate tears, blurring the view of the sodden rose garden beyond. Inside, the air was thick with the perfume of orchids and the sharper bite of turpentine. Charles Dumont stood at an easel, his back to the door, attacking a canvas with a palette knife. The painting was Evelyn, half-formed, her face a smear of ivory and rose, her eyes two voids where the paint had been scraped away. Hercule Poirot entered without ceremony, his shoes crunching on broken shards of a dropped saucer. Inspector Japp followed, his bowler now tucked beneath his arm like a guilty secret. The heat was oppressive. Poirot removed his overcoat and draped it over a wicker chair shaped like a peacock. "Monsieur Dumont," Poirot began, his voice soft as falling ash, "you paint the dead. Is this how you mourn, or how you confess?" Charles' hand stilled. The knife clattered to the parquet floor, leaving a streak of vermilion like a wound. He turned slowly. His face was haggard, the skin stretched tight over the bones. The brilliantine had lost its hold, and black curls clung damply to his forehead. "I paint to remember," he said, his accent thicker than the night before. "Memory is kinder than truth." "Truth," Poirot repeated, savoring the word. "Let us begin with it. You were Lady Evelyn's lover? For how long?" Charles laughed, a brittle sound that shattered against the glass. 6 months. She summoned me from Paris to paint her portrait. Said she wanted to be immortalized before age stole her. But it was never the portrait she wanted. He gestured to the ruined canvas. She wanted to be seen, truly seen. Reginald looked at her as one looks at a balance sheet. You, Monsieur Poirot, you look at people as puzzles. I looked at her as... He stopped, throat working. As a man looks at the sun, knowing it will blind him. Poirot circled the easel. On a side table lay a chaos of tubes, cobalt, viridian, alizarin crimson, beside a half-empty bottle of absinthe and a glass filmed with green residue. And when she ended it, Charles's eyes flicked to the bottle, then away. 3 weeks ago, after Reginald found the letters, she came here at dawn, still in her nightgown, barefoot. Said it was finished, that I was a diversion, nothing more. I begged her, on my knees, like a fool. She laughed, said I was pretty, but prettiness fades. Then she tore the locket from her throat and threw it at me. He opened his fist. The locket lay there, the chain broken, the photograph inside cracked diagonally across Evelyn's smile. Japp stepped forward. "You threatened her?" "I threatened to expose them both, to send the letters to the Tatler, to ruin them." Charles's voice cracked. "But I didn't mean it. I was in love." "Love," Poirot mused, "is a motive as ancient as Cain. Tell me of the afternoon before the dinner." Charles sank onto a wrought iron bench, the cushions exhaling dust. "We met in the summer house. She wanted to return my gifts, a scarf, a book of Verlaine, a miniature I'd painted of her hand. She was cold, businesslike. Said Reginald had agreed to a settlement if I disappeared quietly. I refused. We argued. I grabbed her wrist." He held up his own hand, the fingers trembling. "Hard enough to bruise." She slapped me. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You'll regret this, Charles. Everyone does." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Bruises. Dr. Thorne noted defensive marks on her wrists. You are certain you left no others?" "I swear it. I left her alive and furious. I walked the gardens until dusk. The gardener saw me, old Wilkins. He'll vouch for me." Japp made a note. Poirot moved to a workbench cluttered with artist's paraphernalia. Among the brushes and rags lay a small tin labeled fixatif. He opened it. Inside, a white powder clung to the sides. Cyanide? Charles paled. Fixative for pastels. Harmless, but... He hesitated. Evelyn kept cyanide in her darkroom for toning photographs. She showed me once. A blue bottle, skull, and crossbones. Said it was romantic, like Juliet's potion. Romantic, Poirot echoed. Or convenient. He lifted a handkerchief from the bench, monogrammed CD in scarlet silk. It bore a faint stain, brownish at one corner. This was found near the body. Charles stared. I lost it yesterday morning. Searched everywhere. Or planted, Jap muttered. Poirot's eyes swept the room. On the floor beneath the easel lay a single white kid glove, the mate to the one found in Reginald's desk. A trace of powder dusted the fingertips. Curious. The glove again. It travels, this glove, like a ghost. Charles followed his gaze. Not mine. Evelyn wore white kid to dinner. Amelia borrowed a pair once. Said hers were stained. They were interrupted by a sharp rap. Jenkins appeared, his face ashen. Beg pardon, sir. Miss Forsyth. She's in the dark room. Says she's found something about the cyanide. The dark room lay in the west wing, a windowless chamber smelling of hypo and vinegar. Amelia stood beneath the red safe light, a blue bottle in her gloved hand. The label read potassium cyanide. Danger. It was half empty. I found it behind the developing trays, she said, her voice steady but her eyes bright with triumph. Evelyn's handwriting on the label, but look. She tilted the bottle. A fingerprint, clear in the crimson light, marred the glass. Charles's print. I'd recognize those long fingers anywhere. Charles lunged forward. That's a lie. I haven't been in here since... Since you argued with her last week? Amelia cut in. I saw you through the keyhole. You were holding this exact bottle, threatening to drink it yourself if she didn't leave with you. Poirot took the bottle, turning it carefully. The fingerprint was indeed distinct. Long, elegant, the whorls pronounced. But something nagged at him. The angle, the smudge at the base. Mademoiselle, he said to Amelia, you develop photographs? Amateurishly, Evelyn taught me. And these trays. He indicated the enamel dishes filled with developer, stop bath, fixer. You used them recently? This morning. To process the dinner plates, Evelyn insisted on photographs of every course. Poirot dipped a finger into the fixer tray. It came away smelling of vinegar and something sharper. Hyposulfite, and yet this bottle. He held it to the light. The residue inside is granular, not dissolved. Someone emptied it recently and refilled it with... What? Charles stared, comprehension dawning. Water or wine, to fake the amount. Precisely. Poirot corked the bottle. A sleight of hand. But whose? Amelia's smile faltered. You can't seriously think I think, Poirot said, that everyone in this house is an actor. And the script was written long before the curtain rose. He led them back to the conservatory. On the way they passed the summer house, a folly of trellis and ivy, its windows shattered by last night's storm. Inside, on the cushioned bench, lay a scrap of emerald silk, torn from Evelyn's gown, and beneath it a single gold cufflink, not Reginald's. The engraving was CD. Charles stopped dead. That's impossible. I lost mine weeks ago. Or, Poirot said softly, someone wishes us to believe you did. Back in the conservatory, Poirot arranged the evidence on a table. The locket, the handkerchief, the glove, the cufflink, the blue bottle. A constellation of clues, he said, each pointing to a different star. But constellations, mes amis, are illusions. They exist only from one perspective. He turned to Charles. You loved her. You threatened her. You handled the cyanide, perhaps innocently, perhaps not. But tell me this. When she tore the locket from her throat, what did she say? Charles closed his eyes. You'll never understand betrayal until you've tasted it. Then she walked away. I thought she meant Reginald. Now I think she meant all of us. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the rose garden in brutal clarity, the petals bruised, the thorns black with sap. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the half-hour. Poirot gathered the evidence into a neat pile. The lover's confession is complete, but the play, it has many acts, and the next. He looked toward the door, where Amelia's shadow lingered listening. Begins now. Chapter 5. The Sister's Shadow. The morning room had become a mausoleum. Lilies drooped in their vases, their petals browning at the edges like old lace. Lady Evelyn lay beneath a shroud of Irish linen, the pearls at her throat now dulled by the breath of death. Amelia Forsyth sat beside the bier on a spindle-legged chair, her spine straight as a ruler, her hands folded in her lap with the precision of a child at prayer. She wore the same bottle-green velvet as the night before. The fabric had creased into sharp pleats at the elbows, giving her the look of a marionette whose strings had been cut. Hercule Poirot entered with the silence of a cat, Inspector Japp a heavier shadow behind him. The door closed with a sigh. Mademoiselle Forsyth, Poirot began, removing his hat and placing it upon a pier table as though laying down a gauntlet. You keep vigil with the devotion of a vestal, yet grief, I observe, has not robbed you of appetite for justice. Amelia's eyes, pale gray, the color of winter rain, lifted to his. Someone must speak for her. Reginald is drunk. Charles is painting his remorse. I am the only one left who loved her without condition. Love, Poirot said, tasting the word like a dubious wine, is a currency much debased. Tell me of yours. He drew up a chair opposite her, the legs scraping softly on the parquet. Japp remained by the door, notebook open, pencil poised like a stiletto. Amelia's fingers worried at a rosary of black jet beads. Evelyn was the sun. I was the shadow. Father's will made it official, everything to the eldest, a pittance to the spare. She promised to provide, sent me to Switzerland for finishing school. Bought me gowns I never wore, but always on her terms. Be grateful, Amelia. Behaving like a lady means never asking for more. Her voice cracked on the last word, a hairline fracture in porcelain. Poirot leaned forward. And the codicil? The one leaving your annuity to a home for fallen women? Amelia's lips thinned. She showed it to me 3 days ago. Said I'd become embarrassing. That I'd borrowed her gloves without asking, read her private letters. She was rewriting the will that very afternoon. I begged her to reconsider. She laughed. You'll manage, darling, you always do. Yet you were in the kitchen during the poisoning, Japp interjected. Preparing tea. Jenkins saw you. Amelia nodded. Darjeeling with lemon. Evelyn's favorite. I took it to the drawing room at 7:30. She was alone, arranging the roses. I left the tray on the pianoforte. Her gaze drifted to the instrument, its lid closed like a coffin. The cups were untouched when we sat down to dinner. Poirot rose and crossed to the piano. A silver tray bore 2 Sèvres cups, one with a faint lipstick smudge, Evelyn's shade, rebellious rose. The tea had long since cooled, the lemon slice shriveled. He lifted the lid of the teapot. Inside, the leaves floated like drowned insects. Curious, he murmured. The pot is half full, yet no one drank. He dipped a finger, tasted. Darjeeling, yes, but something else. Bitter beneath the bergamot. Amelia watched him, unblinking. I brewed it myself, from the caddy in the pantry. Poirot replaced the lid. And these gloves? He produced the white kid pair from his pocket, one from Reginald's desk, one from Charles's studio. You borrowed them? Evelyn's. Mine were ruined, ink stained from addressing invitations. She lent me a pair last week. I returned them yesterday morning. Jap stepped forward. We found powder on the fingertips. Talc, you said? Talcum, Amelia corrected. From the dressing table. Evelyn insisted on it. Said leather chapped her hands. Poirot examined the gloves under the green-shaded lamp. The powder was fine, almost crystalline. He touched it to his tongue. Not talc. Potassium cyanide has a similar texture when finely ground. Amelia's rosary snapped. Jet beads scattered across the floor like black hail. That's absurd. I handled the gloves hours before dinner. Hours, Poirot echoed. Yet the residue is fresh. Someone used these gloves recently, to handle the poison perhaps without leaving prints. He knelt, gathering the beads with deliberate care. One had rolled beneath the bier. As he reached for it, his fingers brushed something cold and metallic. He drew out a small silver pillbox, its lid engraved with a monogram. AF inside lay 3 white tablets and a folded scrap of paper. Amelia's breath hitched. That's mine, for headaches. Evelyn kept it in her bureau. Poirot unfolded the paper. In Amelia's neat copper plate. If you change the will, I'll tell Reginald everything. About Paris, about the child. The room seemed to contract. Jap whistled low. Child? Amelia's face drained of color. There was no child. A lie. I wrote it in anger after she threatened to cut me off. I never sent it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yet it was in her possession, hidden beneath the shroud. Why? I don't know. Amelia's hands twisted in her lap. Perhaps she kept it to blackmail me in return. They were interrupted by Jenkins, his knock urgent. Begging your pardon. The chemist in the village, Mr. Hargreaves, he's here. Says Miss Forsyth placed an order last week. Hargreaves was a thin man with a pharmacist's stoop and the nervous tic of blinking every third word. He clutched a ledger like a shield. Miss Forsyth ordered laudanum on the 5th, for headaches, she said. But on the 9th, he flipped the page. She asked about cyanide, said the estate had rats. I refused, told her it required a magistrate's signature. Amelia rose, trembling. I did no such thing. Hargreaves produced a slip of paper. The signature was shaky, but unmistakable. A. Forsyth. Poirot compared it to the note from the pillbox. The A looped identically, the F flourished with the same arrogance. A forgery, perhaps, or a sister's hand. Jap snapped handcuffs from his pocket. Amelia Forsyth, I'm arresting you on suspicion. Wait! Poirot's voice cut like a blade. Observe. He held the chemist's slip to the light. The paper was heavier, the ink darker. This was written with a fountain pen. The note in the pillbox, with a dip pen. Different nibs, different hands. Amelia sagged with relief. Jap looked thunderous. Poirot turned to the bier. With reverence, he lifted the shroud. Evelyn's right hand lay across her breast. The fingers were curled as though clutching something. Gently, he uncurled them. A single jet bead, identical to Amelia's rosary, lay in her palm. She tore it from your throat, Poirot said softly, during a struggle. You were with her after the tea tray, not in the kitchen. Amelia backed away. I came to apologize. She was arranging the roses. We argued. She grabbed my rosary. I pulled away. That's all. That is not all. Poirot's voice was gentle but inexorable. You wore the gloves to handle the decanter. You knew her habit. Always the first glass poured. You planted the cufflinks, the handkerchief, the vial. You forged the chemist's order to cast suspicion on Charles, but the bead, he held it up. This betrays you. It was in her hand when she died. Amelia's knees buckled. Jap caught her before she fell. I didn't mean to kill her, she whispered, just to frighten her. A few drops in the tea, enough to make her ill, to delay the new will. But she drank the wine instead. I watched her die and did nothing. Poirot replaced the shroud. The shadow wished to eclipse the sun, but shadows, mademoiselle, have no substance without light. As Jap led her away, Amelia's voice floated back, thin as a ghost. She betrayed me first. Father's will, Reginald's indifference, Charles's seduction. I was always the afterthought. In the silence that followed, Poirot stood alone with the dead. He opened the piano lid. Inside, nestled among the strings, lay the missing decanter stopper, crystal etched with a tiny H, and beneath it a single white kid glove, the fingertips stained crimson. The glove travels, Poirot murmured, but the hand inside, it changes. Outside, the fog had lifted entirely. The rose garden lay bare, the petals stripped by wind, the thorns gleaming like tiny daggers. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 3. The sister's shadow had confessed, but the puppet master, Poirot knew, still pulled the strings. Chapter 6. Twisted Alliances. The storm arrived without warning, as though the sky itself had been holding its breath since Evelyn's last. One moment the rose garden lay stripped and sullen beneath a pewter sky. The next, the heavens split open. Rain lashed the conservatory roof in sheets, drumming like frantic fingers on glass. Thunder rolled across the downs, a slow artillery barrage that rattled the panes and set the orchids trembling in their pots. Hercule Poirot stood at the French windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the deluge with the calm of a man who had seen worse tempests in the human heart. Inspector Japp paced the parquet, his boots leaving wet prints that evaporated almost as quickly as they formed. Amelia Forsyth had been taken to the village station under guard. Her confession, partial, tear-streaked, half-coherent, still echoed in the air like a cracked bell. Poirot turned from the window. She believes she is guilty, mon ami. But belief is not truth. A woman may poison a cup and still not be the hand that lifts it to the lips. Japp stopped mid-stride. You're saying she's covering for someone? I am saying the puzzle has too many pieces that fit too neatly. The glove that migrates, the cufflinks that multiply, the chemist's order forged in 2 inks. Someone orchestrates this symphony of misdirection. He crossed to the workbench where the evidence lay in orderly rows. The blue cyanide bottle, the white kid gloves, the torn locket, the cufflinks. Reginald's and Charles's, side by side like mismatched twins. Poirot lifted the decanter stopper found beneath the piano strings. It was heavy crystal, etched with a tiny H for Harrington. A hairline crack ran through the initial as though it had been struck with force. Observe, he said, holding it to the green-shaded lamp. The stopper was forced, not removed with a twist but pried. See the scratch along the neck? He indicated a faint silver line on the decanter's rim. A knife, perhaps, or a letter opener. The poison was introduced here in the drawing room after Jenkins decanted the wine in the pantry. Japp scratched his chin. So the wine was clean until the last moment. Precisely. And the stopper replaced badly. It would have leaked slightly, hence the drop on the carpet. A gust of wind hurled rain against the glass. The conservatory lights flickered. Somewhere in the house a door slammed. Poirot replaced the stopper and picked up the blue bottle. This contained cyanide once. Now it holds water tinted with cochineal to mimic wine residue. A prop. Like the vial in Reginald's desk. Like the powder on the gloves. Ground glass, not cyanide. All stage dressing. Japp's eyes narrowed. Then the real poison came from elsewhere. From the factory, Poirot said. Lord Reginald's Imperial Steel works in Sheffield. They use cyanide in electroplating. A quantity went missing in August, officially lost in transit. I telephoned the works manager this morning. The theft was reported, then hushed up. A director's decision. Reginald? Or someone with access to his signature? They were interrupted by Charles Dumont, soaked to the skin, his artist's smock clinging like a second corpse. Rainwater streamed from his hair. "I had to see you," he gasped, "before they locked me away too." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You escaped custody?" "Only the gardener's boy. He owes me a favor. Posed for a sketch last summer." Charles collapsed onto the wicker peacock chair, shivering. "Amelia, she didn't do it alone. She couldn't have. The decanter was under Jenkins's nose the entire evening." "Continuez," Poirot encouraged. Charles wiped his face with a paint-stained hand. "Last week, Amelia came to me. Said she'd found Evelyn's new will. Everything to a cat's home. She was frantic. Asked if I'd help her scare Evelyn into changing it back. A harmless prank, she said. A few drops of laudanum in the tea to make her ill. I refused, but then he hesitated. She showed me a letter. From Reginald to a woman in Buenos Aires, his mistress. He'd been siphoning funds to her for years. Amelia said if Evelyn divorced him, he'd lose everything, including her money. She wanted to use the letter to force his hand. Poirot's mustache twitched. Blackmail. Exactly. I told her to burn it. Instead, she kept it. And yesterday... Charles' voice dropped. I saw her in the pantry with Jenkins. They were arguing. She gave him an envelope. Thick. I think it was money. Jap whistled. The butler? Poirot was already moving. To the pantry. Vite. The storm had turned the corridors into wind tunnels. Drafts howled through keyholes, snuffing candles. The pantry lay at the rear of the house, a stone-flagged chamber smelling of cloves and damp. Jenkins was there, polishing silver with mechanical precision. A storm lantern cast long shadows across the rows of copper pans. Monsieur Jenkins, Poirot said, closing the door against the gale. You have served this family for 40 years. Loyalty is a heavy chain. Sometimes it chokes. The butler's hand stilled on a salver. I don't know what you mean, sir. You mean the envelope from Miss Forsyth, containing perhaps £50 for services rendered? Jenkins's polishing cloth slipped. She asked me to move the decanter from the sideboard to the dumb waiter before dinner. Said her ladyship preferred it closer. I thought nothing of it. And the stopper? I noticed it loose after the fish course. Tightened it myself. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You tightened it after the poison was added. You are the hinge upon which the door swings. Jenkins's face crumpled. Miss Amelia said it was harmless, a sleeping draught to calm her ladyship's nerves. She'd been so agitated. I believed her. When Lady Evelyn collapsed, I thought it was her heart. Jap stepped forward. You'll come with me, Jenkins. Aiding and abetting, even unwittingly. Wait. Poirot raised a hand. He opened a cupboard above the spice rack. Inside lay a small brown bottle, corked, labeled laudanum, half empty. This is what Amelia gave you? Jenkins nodded miserably. Poirot uncorked it, sniffed. Laudanum, yes, but diluted, and beside it... He drew out a second bottle, smaller, unlabeled. The liquid inside was clear, with a faint almond scent. The real poison, substituted at the last moment. By whom? Charles, who had followed them, stared at the bottle. That's the one from the dark room. I saw Amelia take it yesterday. Poirot corked both bottles. Amelia planned to drug her sister, but someone else planned murder. Someone who knew of the laudanum, who substituted cyanide, who planted the evidence to implicate all of you. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The lantern flame guttered. In the darkness, Jenkins whispered, There was a third person in the pantry. After Miss Amelia left, I thought it was Lord Reginald, same height, same walk. But when I turned, the door was closing. Whoever it was wore a black cloak, like the one in the hall stand. Poirot's mind raced. The cloak, oilskin, belonging to the gardener, but the height, he whirled. The summer house, Charles. You said you met Evelyn there yesterday. Was anyone else present? Charles shook his head. Only the storm. They ran. The summer house door hung open, creaking in the wind. Inside, the cushions were soaked, the floor strewn with sodden leaves. Poirot knelt, shining the lantern. In the corner, half buried beneath a pile of gardening gloves, lay a black oilskin cloak. And inside the pocket, a gold cufflink, not Reginald's, not Charles's. The engraving was G.H. Geoffrey Harrington, Poirot breathed. The late Sir Geoffrey, dead these 4 years. Japp stared. A ghost? No, Poirot said grimly. A son, illegitimate perhaps, or a nephew. Someone who believed himself cheated of the estate. Someone who watched from the shadows, who knew every secret, who waited for the perfect moment. Lightning illuminated the garden. For an instant, Poirot saw a figure at the edge of the yew hedge, tall, cloaked, face obscured. Then darkness swallowed it. The game, Poirot said, is no longer among the living. The dead have their revenge. The storm redoubled, as though the manor itself screamed. Chapter 7. Hidden Correspondences. The storm had settled into a steady, malevolent downpour, turning the gravel paths of Harrington Manor into rivers of mud. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath. Every creak of the old timbers sounded like a confession. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway of Lady Evelyn's boudoir, a sanctum of rose silk and gilt that now smelled of damp lace and the faint lingering trace of her perfume. Nuit de Noël, heavy with jasmine and betrayal. Inspector Japp hovered behind him, lantern in hand, its beam cutting through the gloom like a scalpel. The room had been sealed since the murder, but the seal was broken, wax smeared, the paper torn. Someone had been here since dawn. Poirot's eyes swept the chaos with clinical precision. The ormolu clock on the mantel had stopped at 11:47, the exact minute of Evelyn's collapse. Drawers hung open like gaping mouths. Papers spilled across the Aubusson carpet in a snowstorm of cream and gold. A portrait of Evelyn at 20, radiant, cruelly beautiful, had been slashed from chin to crown, the canvas curling like burnt paper. Someone searched in haste, Poirot murmured, or in rage. He knelt, gathering letters with the reverence of a priest handling relics. They were bound, with faded ribbons, blue for Paris, crimson for London, black for secrets. The first bundle was from Charles, passionate scrawls on heavy decal-edged paper, ink blurred by tears or rain. Ma bien-aimée, your silence is a knife. The second bundle, thicker, was from Reginald. The stationery was embossed with the Harrington crest, the ink a stern navy. Threats alternated with pleas. If you shame me again, I will cut you off without a penny. One letter, dated 3 days before the murder, ended with a postscript in a shaking hand. The Argentine woman writes again. She claims the child is mine. Destroy this. Poirot's mustache bristled. A child. The motive deepens. Japp bagged the letters. Reginald's been lying through his teeth. Or protecting a ghost. Poirot moved to the escritoire, a delicate piece of Louis XV, its surface scarred by years of impatient pens. The central drawer was locked. He produced a small leather case from his pocket, selected a pick with the care of a surgeon, and had the drawer open in 3 clicks. Inside lay a single sheet of black-bordered mourning stationery. The handwriting was Amelia's, tight, angry loops. You promised me the estate would be shared. Father's will was a forgery, I have proof. Meet me in the summer house at dusk, or I tell Reginald everything. Beneath it, in Evelyn's elegant script, "Come alone or regret it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The meeting Charles witnessed, but not the last. He opened a side compartment. A bundle of photographs spilled out, sepia images of a child, perhaps 5 years old, with Evelyn's eyes and a stranger's mouth. On the back of one, in pencil, "Buenos Aires, 1927, Ars bastard." Jap whistled. "Reginald's secret family. Or Evelyn's leverage." Poirot slipped the photos into an envelope. "But where is the proof of the forged will?" A floorboard creaked behind them. They whirled to find Dr. Thorne in the doorway, his beard dripping rainwater, a leather medical bag clutched to his chest. I heard voices," he stammered. "The storm woke me. I thought I'd check on the body." Poirot's gaze was mild but piercing. "You were Evelyn's confidant, Doctor. She told you of the child?" Thorne's spectacles fogged. "She was distraught. Said Reginald had a son in Argentina, born before their marriage. She threatened to expose him unless he settled money on Amelia. He refused. Then the new will appeared, cutting Amelia out entirely. And you?" "I advised caution. Poison is not medicine." Thorne's voice cracked. "But she laughed, said some poisons were sweeter than truth." Poirot moved to the fireplace. The grate was cold, but ashes clung to the andirons. He raked them carefully. Fragments of burnt paper emerged, charred edges bearing the Harrington crest. He pieced them together on the hearthrug like a jigsaw of guilt. "The will is invalid. Father's signature forged by—" The rest was ash. "Someone burned the evidence," Jap growled. "But who knew it existed?" Poirot's gaze fell on the slashed portrait. Beneath the torn canvas, a small safe was revealed, its door ajar. Inside, a single document folded small. The original will of Sir Geoffrey Harrington, dated 1925. The signature was shaky, the ink faded, but unmistakably genuine. A codicil, added in 1928, left the bulk of the estate to Evelyn with a clause: "Should my daughter Amelia prove herself unworthy by act or association, her share reverts to my natural grandson, Geoffrey Harrington II, currently resident in Buenos Aires." Jap stared. "There is a legitimate heir." "Legitimate in blood, perhaps," Poirot said, "but not in law. The codicil was never witnessed, invalid, yet Evelyn knew. She used it to control Amelia and Reginald." A gust of wind slammed the windows. The chandelier swayed, crystals chiming like funeral bells. Poirot replaced the will in the safe and closed the door. The forger of the chemist's order, the planter of cufflinks, the burner of letters, they all serve one purpose: to hide this truth. The real killer is not among the lovers or the sisters. He is the shadow who believes himself the true heir. They descended to the great hall. Jenkins met them, his face gray. "Sir, the cloak from the summer house, it's gone, and the gardener's boy, he's vanished." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The boy who posed for Charles, who let him escape, who wore the cloak." Charles appeared at the foot of the stairs, paint still on his fingers. "You're looking for Tommy Wilkins? The gardener's lad? He's not a lad, he's 25. Came from Argentina 2 years ago. Said he was running from trouble. Lord Reginald gave him work out of pity." Jap swore. "The bastard's son?" "Or the grandson," Poirot corrected. "Geoffrey Harrington II. He knew the will, the codicil, the secrets. He waited, watched. When Evelyn threatened to expose him, he struck." They moved to the servants' quarters. Tommy's room was a monk's cell. Narrow bed, crucifix above the door, a single photograph pinned to the wall, Evelyn younger, smiling at a dark-haired boy. On the back, "To my nephew G from Aunt E." Beneath the mattress, a passport in the name of Geoffrey Harrington, visa stamped Buenos Aires, and a small leather notebook. The entries were in Spanish, but Poirot translated swiftly, She knows. Must silence her before the new will is signed. Amelia is useful, jealous, greedy. Plant the gloves, the cufflinks. Let them hang each other. The final entry dated the night of the murder. The poison is in the decanter. She will drink to love. I drink to justice. Jap reached for handcuffs that weren't needed. Where is he? Poirot looked toward the storm-lashed windows. In the summer house. Where it began, where it ends. They ran. The rain had turned the garden into a quagmire. Their shoes sank ankle-deep. The summer house door hung open, swaying in the wind. Inside, a single candle burned on the bench. Geoffrey Harrington II, Tommy no longer, stood in the center, the black cloak pooled at his feet. In his hand, a revolver, its barrel steady. "You're too late," he said, his accent a blend of Eton and Buenos Aires. "The will is burnt, the evidence gone. I am the heir." Poirot stepped forward, unarmed, his voice calm. "You are a murderer. The law does not recognize blood bought with poison." Geoffrey's laugh was bitter. "The law recognized my grandfather's forgery. He stole my birthright for his legitimate brat. Evelyn knew, she taunted me with it, said I'd scrub floors while she wore pearls." He raised the gun. Jap tensed, but Poirot raised a hand. "You substituted the laudanum with cyanide. You wore the cloak, planted the cufflinks, burned the letters, but you made one mistake." Geoffrey's eyes flickered. "What?" "The stopwatch in the dining room. You stopped it at 11:47 to create confusion about the time of death. But the library clock, you forgot to adjust it. It read 11:52, 5 minutes. Enough to cross the corridor, loosen the stopper, return. But the stopwatch was Evelyn's, a gift from Charles. You didn't know it chimed on the hour. It chimed at midnight. After she was dead." Geoffrey's hand wavered. A detail that hangs you." Lightning illuminated the summer house. In that flash, Poirot saw the truth. Geoffrey's cloak pocket bulged with the missing decanter stopper, crystal, etched with H, the final piece. Jap lunged. The gun roared, shattering a pane of glass. Geoffrey fell, the revolver skittering across the floor. Poirot knelt, retrieving the stopper. "The circle closes," he said softly. "The betrayed love was never Evelyn's. It was his." Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened to a whisper as though the manor itself exhaled. In the candlelight, Geoffrey Harrington II wept, not for his victim, but for the inheritance that had cost him everything. Chapter 8. The Poison's Trail. The summer house had become a cage. Rain dripped through the shattered pane, pooling on the stone floor in dark, reflective islands. Geoffrey Harrington II, Tommy Wilkins, no longer sat handcuffed to the iron bench, the black cloak sodden at his feet. The revolver lay in Inspector Jap's evidence bag, its barrel still warm. Hercule Poirot stood beneath the broken skylight, the decanter stopper in his gloved hand, turning it slowly so the etched H caught the candle's flame like a dying star. Outside, the storm had spent itself. The wind now sighed through the yews, carrying the scent of wet earth and crushed rosemary. The garden, stripped bare, looked like a battlefield after the guns fell silent. Poirot addressed the prisoner in the calm, conversational tone he might use to discuss the weather. "You believed yourself the rightful heir, monsieur. Yet you poisoned not only Lady Evelyn, but the very idea of justice. Tell me, how did the cyanide travel from Sheffield to this crystal decanter?" Geoffrey's laugh was a dry rasp. "You think you've caught me, little Belgian, but the trail is cold, burnt, like the will." "Trails," Poirot replied, "are never truly cold when the little gray cells are warm." He gestured to Jap, who produced the small leather notebook seized from Geoffrey's room. "Your journal is most illuminating. The poison is in the decanter." But the decanter was sealed in the pantry until 7:30. You had no access then. Geoffrey's eyes flicked to the doorway where Jenkins stood, head bowed, flanked by 2 constables. Ask the butler. He moved it. Jenkins flinched. I told you, sir. Miss Amelia asked me to place it on the dumb waiter. I thought it harmless. Poirot nodded. And you tightened the stopper after the fish course. Yet the scratch on the neck, the pry mark, was made before dinner. Someone loosened it earlier, in the pantry, while you were polishing silver. He crossed to the evidence table Jap had improvised from a potting bench. Upon it lay the blue bottle from the dark room, the laudanum vial, the white kid gloves, the cufflinks, the torn locket, and now the stopper. Poirot arranged them in a precise semicircle like planets around a dark sun. Let us reconstruct, he said. The real cyanide came from Imperial Steel, stolen in August, recorded as lost in transit. The thief signed the requisition with Lord Reginald's name, but the handwriting expert in London will confirm the forgery. Your handwriting, monsieur. He tapped Geoffrey's journal. The G loops leftward like a noose. Geoffrey's jaw tightened. Prove it. I will. But first, the substitution. Poirot lifted the laudanum bottle. Amelia intended a sleeping draught. You knew this. How? A pause. Then bitterly. She confided in me. Said Evelyn was rewriting the will. I offered to help. Told her to use laudanum. She showed me the bottle. I swapped it that afternoon while she was in the garden. Jap leaned forward. Where did you keep the cyanide? In the potting shed, mixed with rat bait. No one looks twice at a gardener's poison. Poirot opened the blue darkroom bottle. This contained the original cyanide. You emptied it, rinsed it, refilled it with water and cochineal to mimic residue. A clever prop. But the real poison, you transferred it to a smaller container. This. He produced a tiny glass vial, no larger than a thimble, found in the cloak pocket. A trace of white crystals clung to the interior. Enough for 1 glass. You carried it in your waistcoat during dinner. Geoffrey's composure cracked. I was a servant, invisible. I poured the wine when Jenkins turned away, slipped the crystals through the loosened stopper. She drank to love. I drank to vengeance. Poirot's voice softened. But vengeance is a poison that kills the vessel first. Tell me of the child. Geoffrey's eyes filled, whether with rain or tears, impossible to tell. My father was Sir Geoffrey's bastard. Born in Buenos Aires, 1900. Grandfather acknowledged him privately, promised the estate if no legitimate heir appeared. Then Evelyn was born. The promise became a curse. My father died in poverty. I came here to claim what was mine. He gestured to the photograph Jap held, Evelyn with the dark-haired boy. She knew, taunted me, said I'd scrub floors while she wore pearls. When she threatened to expose the codicil, I had no choice. Poirot replaced the vial. You had every choice. You chose murder. He turned to the gloves. These, you wore them to handle the stopper, to avoid prints. But 1 glove you planted in Charles's studio, 1 in Reginald's desk. The powder, ground glass, to mimic cyanide residue. You tore the locket yourself to implicate the lover. The cufflinks, 1 stolen from each man, engraved with acid in the potting shed. Jap bagged the gloves. And the stopwatch? Stopped at 11:47 to confuse the timeline. But the dining room clock was accurate. Evelyn died at 11:52, 5 minutes. Enough for you to cross from the pantry corridor, loosen the stopper earlier, return during the confusion. Geoffrey lunged against the cuffs. You can't prove I was in the dining room. Poirot produced a small tin from his pocket, the fixative tin from Charles' studio. Inside, not powder, but a single white feather. From the pheasant. You served the birds, monsieur. Jenkins was distracted by Dr. Thorne's gout. You leaned over the decanter, feather brushed the rim. It lodged in the stopper's groove, microscopic, but there. He held the feather to the candle. It curled, blackened, vanished. Like your alibi. Silence fell, broken only by the drip of rain. Then Poirot's voice, gentle. One more thing. The note in Evelyn's hand. Betrayal comes from those we trust most. You wrote it, in her handwriting, forged from letters in her bureau. But the ink, Parker Quink, new batch. She used Waterman's. The betrayal was yours, but the words were hers. She suspected you. Geoffrey sagged. She found the vial in the shed, confronted me at dusk. Said she'd tell Reginald everything. I pushed her. She fell, hit her head on the bench. I thought she was dead. Then she stirred. I panicked. The poison was meant for later. I forced it between her lips. Jap's face was stone. Premeditated murder. Poirot turned away. The trail ends here, but the poison, it lingers. He stepped into the garden. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet boxwood and rebirth. Behind him, Geoffrey's voice rose in a final, broken plea. She stole my life. Poirot did not look back. And you stole hers. The scales do not balance. The manor, the clocks began to chime 4. One by one, they found their rhythm again. The poison's trail was mapped, the vessel broken. But in the silence that followed, Poirot felt the weight of a deeper truth. Love betrayed is the deadliest toxin of all. Chapter 9. Gathering Storm. The drawing room of Harrington Manor had been stripped of its festive ghosts. The long table was gone, replaced by a circle of chairs arranged with the precision of a séance. Candelabras stood at the 4 corners, their flames steady despite the drafts that slithered through the cracked windows. Outside, the sky hung low and bruise-colored, the last of the storm's clouds refusing to disperse. Hercule Poirot entered first, his patent leather shoes leaving no prints on the freshly waxed parquet. He wore the same charcoal overcoat, but the Homburg was now in his hand, revealing the perfect oval of his head. Inspector Japp followed, flanked by 2 constables whose boots thudded like muffled drumbeats. Lord Reginald Harrington came next, supported by Dr. Thorne. The Lord's face was the color of old parchment, his eyes sunken in violet shadows. Charles Dumont trailed behind, paint still flecking his cuffs, his artist's fingers twitching as though seeking a brush to capture the scene. Amelia Forsyth was last, escorted by a police matron, her bottle green velvet replaced by a plain gray prison dress that made her look smaller, almost childlike. Geoffrey Harrington II, revealed unmasked, was brought in handcuffed between 2 officers. The gardener's smock had been exchanged for a borrowed suit 2 sizes too large. The cuffs swallowed his wrists and the trousers pooled at his ankles. His dark hair was slicked back, but a single lock had escaped, curling defiantly over his forehead. Poirot took the central chair, placing his hat upon the table like a judge's gavel. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice cutting through the room's stale air. We gather not for a trial, but for truth. The storm has passed, but the tempest within each heart remains. Let us lay it bare. He gestured, and Japp placed the evidence in the circle's center. The decanter stopper, the tiny cyanide vial, the forged chemist's order, the burnt will fragments, the white kid gloves, the cufflinks, the locket, the stopwatch, the pheasant feather. Each item tagged and numbered like relics in a museum of betrayal. Observe, Poirot said, the constellation of deceit. Every piece points to a different culprit, yet all orbit the same dark star. The belief that love betrayed justifies murder. He turned to Reginald. My lord, you discovered your wife's affair. You threatened divorce, ruin. You kept a vial of cyanide in your desk for photography. You burned letters in the library grate. Yet you drank whiskey, not wine. Your motive was pride, but your opportunity was nil. Reginald's knuckles whitened on the chair arms. I wanted her shamed, not dead. Poirot nodded to Charles. Monsieur Dumont, You loved passionately. You threatened exposure. Your handkerchief, your cufflink, your print on the blue bottle, all planted. You argued with Evelyn in the summer house, bruised her wrist. Yet you walked the gardens at the fatal hour, seen by the stable boy. Your sin was obsession, not assassination. Charles's voice was hoarse. I wanted her alive, to paint her, to possess her. To Amelia, Mademoiselle, you planned to drug your sister with laudanum to delay the new will. You enlisted Jenkins, forged the chemist's order, planted evidence to implicate the others. The bead in Evelyn's hand, torn from your rosary in a struggle. But the poison was substituted. Your intent was coercion, not corpse. Amelia's lips trembled. She was going to leave me nothing. I wanted her to see me. Poirot's gaze settled on Geoffrey. And you, monsieur, the shadow heir. You believed the estate yours by blood. You stole cyanide from the factory, forged requisitions, waited 2 years as a servant. You loosened the stopper in the pantry, substituted the laudanum, poured the poison during the pheasant course. You stopped the stopwatch, burned the codicil, planted every false clue. Your motive was inheritance. Your method, murder most meticulous. Geoffrey's eyes blazed. She mocked me. Said I'd die scrubbing her floors while she wore father's pearls. I gave her the death she deserved. Poirot raised a hand. Non. You gave her the death you deserved, but one piece remains. He lifted the torn locket. This photograph. Evelyn kept it close. Why tear it? He opened the locket. The crack ran diagonally across Evelyn's face, but beneath the torn half, a second image had been concealed, smaller, pasted behind. A boy, perhaps 10, with Geoffrey's eyes and Evelyn's mouth. On the back, in faded ink. To my son, G, forgive me. E. The room froze. Poirot's voice was soft. Evelyn bore a child in Paris, 1922. Before her marriage, the father, unknown. She gave the boy to a convent, then to a family in Argentina. She tracked him, sent money, photographs. The boy was you, Geoffrey, not Sir Geoffrey's grandson. Her son. She discovered your identity 6 months ago. The new will, it left everything to you under your real name. She was going to acknowledge you publicly, to make amends. Geoffrey stared at the locket as though it were a live coal. No, she hated me. She said harsh things to protect you, from Reginald's wrath, from scandal. She burned the codicil not to disinherit Amelia, but to destroy the evidence of your illegitimacy. The charity bequest was a blind. The real will, hidden in the safe, names you sole heir. Reginald lunged to his feet. The bitch! She played us all! Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. Silence. She played no one. She tried to right a wrong committed in youth. You, Geoffrey, mistook her caution. For contempt. You killed your own mother for an inheritance she was giving you. Geoffrey's face crumpled. The handcuffs rattled as he sank to his knees. I didn't know. She never told me. I thought she was cutting me out like everyone else. Amelia began to sob, harsh, wrenching sounds that tore from her throat. Charles buried his face in his hands. Reginald stared at the floor, his empire of pride in ruins. Poirot stood. The toast, to love and its inevitable betrayals. Evelyn spoke truth. She betrayed her son by abandonment. He betrayed her by murder. You all betrayed her, with jealousy, greed, silence. The poison was not in the wine. It was in the hearts around this table. He gathered the evidence, placing each item in its bag with ceremonial care. The law will take its course. Geoffrey Harrington will hang for matricide. The others, for complicity, for lies, for the smaller poisons of the soul. Lightning flickered, though the storm had passed. The candelabra flames bowed as one. Poirot donned his hat. The manor will pass to charity after all. The betrayed love has no heir but memory. As the constables led Geoffrey away, he whispered, Tell them. tell them I'm sorry." Poirot did not reply. He stepped into the corridor where the portraits of dead Harringtons watched with painted eyes. The clock struck the half-hour. In the drawing room, the candles guttered one by one until only darkness remained. Chapter 10. The ultimate revelation. The drawing room was a tomb of flickering shadows. The candelabra had burned low, their flames guttering in pools of molten wax, casting the circle of chairs into a dim, amber haze. The evidence lay bagged and silent on the table, each item a mute witness to the unraveling of Harrington Manor's darkest secrets. Outside, the storm's remnants had dissolved into a soft, relentless drizzle, tapping the windows like the fingers of the dead. Hercule Poirot stood at the heart of the circle, his small frame erect, his eyes gleaming with the quiet triumph of truth unveiled. Inspector Japp flanked him, his notebook closed for the first time, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had seen too many hearts laid bare. The suspects, Lord Reginald Charles Dumont, Amelia Forsyth, and Geoffrey Harrington II, sat in their appointed places, each a prisoner of their own making. The constables stood at the doors, their presence a silent promise of justice. Poirot's voice, when it came, was soft but inexorable, a scalpel slicing through the last veils of deception. "Mesdames et messieurs, the play is nearly over. The curtain falls on a tragedy of blood and betrayal, but the final act belongs to truth. Let us speak it plainly." He lifted the torn locket, its cracked photograph of Evelyn and her secret son catching the candlelight. Lady Evelyn Harrington was a woman of passion and mistake. In 1922, in Paris, she bore a child out of wedlock. She gave him up, believing it mercy. That child was you, Geoffrey Harrington. She tracked you to Buenos Aires, sent money, photographs, love disguised as duty. 6 months ago, she learned you were here under her roof, scrubbing floors as Tommy Wilkins. She rewrote her will to name you sole heir, not out of guilt alone, but love. Geoffrey, handcuffed and hollow-eyed, stared at the locket as though it were a foreign object. She never told me. She mocked me, called me a servant, a nobody. Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. She protected you. From scandal, from Reginald's wrath, from the truth that would have branded you bastard in a society that devours its own. The new will, hidden in her safe, left everything to Geoffrey Harrington, her son. The charity bequest was a blind, the burned codicil a shield. She planned to acknowledge you publicly after the dinner. Reginald stirred, his voice a croak. She played me for a fool. All those years, her money propping up my failures, and she had a son. "Silence," Poirot snapped, his mustache quivering. "Your pride poisoned you long before the cyanide touched her lips. You knew of the Argentine mistress, the debts, the factory thefts you concealed. You burned letters to hide your own betrayals, but you did not kill." He turned to Charles. "Monsieur Dumont, your love was a fire that consumed. You wrote desperate letters, threatened exposure, bruised her wrist in the summer house. Your handkerchief, your cufflink, planted to implicate you. But you were in the garden when the poison struck, seen by the stable boy. Your sin was passion, not murder." Charles's hands trembled. "I wanted her to choose me. I never wanted her dead." To Amelia, "Mademoiselle, you schemed with laudanum to delay the will, to force your sister's hand. You enlisted Jenkins, forged the chemist's order, planted false clues. The rosary bead in her hand, torn in your struggle, but the cyanide was not yours. You sought control, not a corpse." Amelia's sob was a broken thing. "She was my son. I only wanted to be seen." Poirot's eyes settled on Geoffrey. "And you, monsieur, you believed yourself cheated by a forged will, a cruel aunt. You stole cyanide from Imperial Steel, signed requisitions in Reginald's name, waited as a servant for your moment. You loosened the decanter stopper in the pantry, substituted Amelia's laudanum with poison, poured it during the pheasant course while Jenkins was distracted. You stopped the stopwatch at 11:47 to confuse the timeline, planted gloves, cufflinks, the blue bottle's false residue. You burned the codicil to erase your illegitimacy. You wrote the note in her hand. Betrayal comes from those we trust most. Forged from her letters, inking it with Parker Quink while she used Waterman's. Every clue was your creation, a labyrinth to trap the innocent. Jeffrey's head bowed. I thought she hated me. She said I'd die a servant. I found the vial in the shed. She was coming to confront me. I pushed her. She fell. I thought she was dead. Then she moved. I forced the poison into her mouth. For my birthright. Poirot's voice hardened. Your birthright was her love freely given. You killed your mother for a lie you told yourself. He lifted the final piece, the decanter stopper, its H cracked like a fractured soul. This bears the pheasant feather caught when you leaned over the table. The pry mark on the neck made with a gardener's knife found in the potting shed with your fingerprints. The stopwatch chimed at midnight after her death, proving your timeline false. The locket's hidden photograph. Your baby face. Her handwriting on the back. Every detail betrays you. Jeffrey lunged, chains rattling, but the constables held him fast. I was the heir. She stole my life. Poirot's eyes were winter steel. You stole hers, and in doing so you orphaned yourself. He turned to the room. The toast, to love and its inevitable betrayals, was Evelyn's confession. She betrayed her son by giving him up, betrayed her husband with passion, betrayed her sister with favor. But she sought redemption. You, Jeffrey, betrayed her with death, the others with silence, jealousy, greed. The poison was not in the wine alone. It was in every heart that failed her. Japp stepped forward, signaling the constables. Jeffrey Harrington, you are under arrest for the murder of Lady Evelyn Harrington. The rest of you, charges of accessory, perjury, concealment to follow. Reginald slumped. His empire dissolved. Charles stared at the locket, tears cutting tracks through the paint on his cheeks. Amelia's sobs filled the room, raw and childlike. Jeffrey was led away, his head high, but his eyes empty. The eyes of a man who had won a kingdom and lost a mother. Poirot gathered his hat. The manor passes to charity as Evelyn intended in her final deception. The Harrington line ends not in blood but in justice. He paused at the door where Jenkins waited, his butler's mask cracked with grief. Monsieur Jenkins, you served loyally, but loyalty to the living blinded you to the dead. The laudanum was your error, but not your crime. Jenkins bowed, tears falling. I failed her, sir. We all fail, Poirot said softly. But truth does not. In the great hall, the portraits of dead Harringtons seemed to watch as Poirot donned his Homburg. The clock struck 4, its chimes clear and unafraid. Georges waited with the Daimler, its engine purring like a faithful hound. As they drove through the gates, the manor shrank in the rear window, its windows dark, its secrets spilled. Poirot lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the gloom. Love, he murmured to the night, is the most dangerous betrayal of all. It promises eternity but delivers only the moment, and in that moment we are all poisoners. The drizzle softened, to mist. The road to London stretched ahead, and Hercule Poirot, his little gray cells sated, closed his eyes. The case was closed. The storm was over. But in the silence of Harrington Manor, the echo of a mother's love, betrayed, redeemed, and lost, lingered like a ghost that would never depart.